Okay, so let's dive in. We've got this fascinating stack of sources you sent over, and they raise a really, well, a surprising question, don't they?
They really do.
Can something as abstract as philosophy, thinking about big ideas like justice or truth, actually have affected something as fundamental as human evolution?
Yeah, and it's crucial right off the bat to clarify what we mean. The sources aren't really talking about biological evolution in the strict Darwinian sense, longer legs or bigger brains purely physically.
Right.
It's much more about a cultural and um, a cognitive story,
Mm.
how we developed as thinking social beings.
Exactly. The core idea here, looking through this material, seems to be that philosophy acted as this incredibly powerful tool, not for like hunting mammoths better directly,
No, not directly.
but for shaping our societies, shaping our minds in ways that gave humans some really unique advantages down the line.
hmm So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to unpack how these sources make that case. We'll be looking at philosophy's role in, well, how we think, how we cooperate, governance, even the birth of science.
And personal well being, too, apparently. It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. It's trying to get at the why behind what makes us, uniquely human.
Okay, so let's start there. The sources seem to argue that philosophy isn't just some academic thing for dusty libraries. It's deeply tied to what makes us us.
That's right. It's about our capacity for abstract thought, pushing beyond just noticing the world to thinking about concepts you can't actually, you know, touch or see.
Like time or morality.
Justice, the idea of a self, all that big stuff. And the sources highlight this as a really distinct human capability.
So why is your ability, the listener's ability, to think about these abstract things so important, evolutionarily speaking?
Well, the argument is that it massively enhanced our reasoning and abstract thinking skills. And those are just crucial for complex problem solving, especially in social groups. Planning, strategy.
Things you need for survival when you live together?
Exactly. And interestingly, the sources suggest this demand for abstract thought probably push language development too. You need better tools, better words to talk about these complex ideas.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting for me based on the material. They give this example. Early humans asking, why do people die?
Yeah, seems simple, maybe morbid, but think about the implications.
Right, it's not just a sad observation. That question, which is fundamentally philosophical, could lead to shared rituals around death that build social bonds.
hmm Or it could lead to thinking about how to live, how to treat each other before death, which is, the seat of ethics, maybe even early religion ways to frame the unknown.
You see it even now, right? Think about how you automatically look for explanations for things, especially the big, difficult things in life.
Absolutely. And the sources dig into this cognitive evolution aspect. It's not just being aware, but that next step, being aware that you are aware, metacognition.
And philosophy kind of emerges from that space, asking, what am I? What's the point of suffering? What happens when I die?
Precisely. And the crucial point the material makes is these weren't just idle thoughts. They had practical value. Reflecting on existence helped humans plan. Like, okay, death is a thing. Maybe we should store food for the winter.
Or evaluate relationships. Can I actually trust this person based on, past behavior and some concept of fairness?
And anticipating consequences.
Mhm.
If I break this rule, what happens? That requires abstract thought about social structures and potential outcomes.
There was another example in there that really stood out. A tribe asking, why do some people die young?
Right. And they probably wouldn't land on, germ theory right away.
Probably not.
But the act of asking, of philosophizing about it, could lead them to create rituals or change behaviors, maybe even stumble onto basic hygiene practices based on their worldview.
Which could, even accidentally, improve survival rates.
Exactly. It shows how just asking why can drive real, tangible change, even without perfect scientific understanding. It's about making sense of the world.
Humans needed explanations for scary, unpredictable things like lightning or disease.
In philosophy, in its early forms, proto-scientific, religious, moral offered frameworks, ways to model the world.
Yep.
Concepts like ontology, what is real, and causality, why do things happen. These help guide decisions.
Reduce the chaos a bit, gave some stability.
Yes, exactly. It helped reduce that cognitive chaos in a world that must have felt incredibly uncertain.
Okay, so that's the impact on the individual mind, the cognitive side. But the sources argue this didn't stop there, right? It fundamentally reshaped society, too.
Absolutely. That's the next big pillar in the material. social evolution. Philosophy was apparently essential for creating shared moral systems, and that allowed cooperation way beyond just your immediate family.
Which is a huge advantage for group survival.
Massive.
Yeah.
It led to social norms, rules for behavior
Mhm.
that reduces conflict inside the group, builds trust, and the sources really stress the emergence of mechanisms for justice.
Moving beyond simple revenge.
Right. Towards a more structured, agreed-upon process for handling disputes. That's a huge leap for societal stability.
And the material gives specific examples here, which is helpful. Things like Confucianism in China or Stoicism in Rome.
Yeah, these weren't just philosophies on paper. They directly influenced how those societies were governed, how order was maintained, what ethical behavior looked like across huge populations.
The sources also mention philosophies like Ubuntu in Africa, providing frameworks for harmony and dignity within the community.
Exactly. Frameworks that structured how people interacted and lived together.
And you can see how, as groups got bigger, tribes becoming villages, then cities you'd need more than just gut feeling to run things. This is where political philosophy comes in.
Yes, the sources trace that lineage. Philosophy started tackling those really tricky questions of power. Who gets to rule? And on what basis? Why?
And questions about law, rights. What is justice in a large group? What does freedom mean? How should society be structured? Hierarchy, equality.
All fundamental political questions rooted in philosophical inquiry.
The examples cited are pretty powerful. Plato's philosopher king's idea, maybe not practical, but it shaped thinking about leadership for ages.
Definitely. And then you get thinkers like Locke, Rousseau, Hobbes. Their philosophical arguments laid the groundwork for modern ideas about democracy, rights, the state, things we still grapple with.
So, connecting this back to the main theme, the sources are basically saying these philosophical blueprints weren't just intellectual exercises.
Not at all. They were practical tools that helped societies build structures that were more resilient, more adaptable, more likely to last. It gave them an edge.
Okay, so we've got mind, we've got society. The next big claim in the material is about philosophy driving progress, specifically.
Wow.
Well, leading to science itself. That sounds huge.
It is a bold claim, but the argument is compelling. Before we had science as a distinct discipline, we had natural philosophy,
Right. People asking questions like, what's the world actually made of?
which eventually leads towards physics,
Or, how do we know anything for sure?
which becomes epistemology, the study of knowledge. It all started with those fundamental philosophical questions about reality and our ability to understand it.
And this questioning habit, this philosophical doubt, is what evolved into systematic observation, experimentation.
That's the idea. The sources point to the ancient Greeks, like Democritus thinking about atoms or Aristotle classifying nature. They were doing natural philosophy.
And then later, the Enlightenment. Heavily philosophical.
Absolutely. Thinkers like Descartes, with his radical doubt demanding clear reasons. Or Bacon, championing empiricism, the idea that knowledge comes from observation. They were refining the philosophical basis for the scientific method.
The sources flat out say, without philosophy, science wouldn't exist, when you think about it like that.
It really shifts your perspective, doesn't it? It puts philosophy right at the root of so much progress.
Yeah, it does. But okay, beyond the external world and science, the sources also talk about philosophy helping us with, well, the internal challenges, the uniquely human stuff.
Right. The awareness of death, existential angst,
Yeah.
the burden of making choices, things that come with our level of consciousness.
That sounds tough to deal with, evolutionarily speaking. How did philosophy help there?
By providing frameworks for meaning-making. Narratives, stories, ethical systems, existential maps, ways to cope, find hope, and just, function. Psychological survival tools.
The examples given are pretty clear. Stoicism helping people find inner peace even when things are terrible externally.
Or Buddhism, tackling the nature of suffering head-on. Even modern existentialism, wrestling with freedom and responsibility in a potentially meaningless universe.
It helps you find your meaning.
Exactly. And the sources argue this wasn't a luxury. This was vital for mental resilience across populations, helping people process trauma, accept mortality, build meaningful lives despite hardship.
That Socrates quote they included really hits home. The unexamined life is not worth living.
It captures it perfectly, that need to question, to seek meaning. The sources frame it not as a distraction, but as essential to our flourishing, maybe even our survival as a species that thinks this much.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive into the sources you shared?
Well, it seems philosophy was key in helping us build order, both internal order, self-awareness, ethics, and external order, law, governance, even science. And it helped us navigate the messy existential parts of being human through meaning-making.
So the central argument really holds. Philosophy didn't make us run faster, but it let us build civilizations.
Exactly, and building civilizations completely changed the evolutionary game for humans. It created entirely new ways to survive, cooperate, and grow.
The advantage wasn't just muscles, it was the mind's ability to ask deep questions and construct complex answers about everything.
About existence, morality, society.
Yeah. So here's the final thought, pulling from the material for you, the listener, to chew on. The sources suggest that societies, and maybe even individuals, who really engaged in that deeper questioning, who used philosophy to refine their understanding.
They built more stable, more innovative, more cooperative structures.
Which, in evolutionary terms, made them more likely to survive, adapt, thrive, reproduce.
It's a powerful thought.
It really is. What does that tell us about the evolutionary advantage of wonder itself? And maybe the importance of asking those deep questions in your own life and in our society even today?